Sometimes we don't know the difference between reality and something that isn't real. But why? How do we know something exists if we can't see it? Maybe that's what we call feeling. I'll tell you my story and you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. It all started one night in my attic. I was lying on the floor. It was dark, with nothing visible but half a meter in front of me. To be honest, I don't know what I was doing there. All I know is that I woke up there with no memory of how I was in that place. Worst of all, my house doesn't have an attic. What did it mean that I was in someone else's house that I didn't know? There was a dense silence that was almost suffocating for me because the slightest movements I made sounded everywhere. I remember observing the place, or at least what I could make out near me, until I heard a rather dislocated sound of footsteps. It sounded like someone was doing their best not to be heard, but it was hard to ignore the eerie creak of the wooden floor somewhere further away in the abyss in front of me, passing through the objects scattered around the attic. I quickly slid backwards, seeing that I was sitting helplessly on the hard floor, as if hiding from whatever was crawling near me. Honestly, I don't remember being so scared at first, but as the thing got closer, I could hear a very low laugh coming from that unknown direction and, at that moment, I could feel my stomach sink and my chest grow heavy. Something is behind me, I thought, and somehow it knows where I am. I remember, at least a little, getting up as slowly as possible so as not to alert the person, or whatever it was, that I was aware of its presence. I looked around quickly in search of some kind of path that would lead me away from this place, but to no avail. The darkness seemed to get more and more aggressive as I inhabited the enclosed area, until I felt as if it was swallowing me up completely. I began to look for an object that would start to lead in the opposite direction of the thing. I quickly felt a box to my right. It was good enough for me, and I began to walk tenderly in that direction. All the while, the now sinister laughter began to sound directly behind me. I turned quickly ready to face my predator, but as quickly as I turned I found nothing there but darkness once again. With that, I turned back to my journey when I saw something crawling low to the ground, creeping towards me without looking at me. I freaked out, as I think anyone with their sanity intact would, and fell back onto the hard wooden floor beneath me. I remember recoiling violently, this time feeling sick with all the fear that had built up in my gut, and finding this thing right in front of me, now at my feet. It was a shadow-like figure and it didn't change from that state for the entire time I was in the attic. I could see it briefly writhing on the floor, although it wasn't that noticeable. I could still see that it was moving in an unnatural way. It was bizarre. The creature, now at my feet, had long limbs that stretched across the floor into the darkness and its body looked bony and grotesque. I couldn't move because of how terrifying the thing was, and when it climbed on top of me, I could feel its cold, disgusting hands pressing hard against me. At this point, I snapped out of my fear. I knew I had to escape. I began to struggle violently to get rid of the creature. I didn't dare look directly at it, but instead, it pinned me down hard against the ground by my shoulders. Even though I was struggling, it didn't seem to care. It was then that I looked at the disfigured predator and, unfortunately, the first thing I saw was his unhinged, disturbingly low jaw. I could see his chipped, jagged teeth that reminded me of a shark's because he had several rows, or rather sets, of teeth, and while I was still as far away from him as I could get, he lowered his head so close to mine that I could feel him breathing right next to my cheek. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my shoulder. I screamed in pain as I looked up to find that my skin had been ripped from my body and placed in this creature's mouth. Sobbing, I watched my skin, still slightly stuck to me, descend into the creature's stomach, with red drops painting the ground that held me. I started to panic and shouted, "Get out of me! Get out of me!" I screamed louder and louder. He was chewing my flesh like a person chews gum, while inspecting me from head to toe. Once again I looked up only to find him inches from my face with a grim smile that disgusted me, a smile I can still remember and see every day. As he stood there, chewing and staring at me, I realized that he had raised his claws and vigorously slammed my face against the wood with a loud, crashing sound. I became dizzy and my vision blurred, the thing now squeezing my face making my head look tiny compared to the hand that held it. I remember feeling its sharp claws dig deep into my head, when one of its fingers dug into my eye, making me scream as I felt a hot liquid run down my cheek and fast. I knew I was bleeding profusely and I just wanted to get out of that place, out of that situation, even though I knew I might never get out again. I heard the macabre laughter from before again, but now it was crazed, and while I was literally pinned to the ground, I became nauseous and began to feel myself falling into an almost paralyzed state. I couldn't move at this point, my breathing was becoming less frequent and now I was sweating non-stop. I felt like I was drifting in and out of consciousness listening to the obscene laughter coming from the monster on top of me. The pain got so bad that I started to get short of breath and soon the creature grabbed my arms. I was confused about the whole situation, about everything. I began to hear another kind of sound, one I had never heard before. I realized it was the sound of bones being forcibly removed from me. Pain ran from my arm to my brain as that demon squeezed my head. At that moment I wanted to faint so as not to feel any more pain, but to no avail. I remember screaming out loud because of all the pain I was feeling, so much so that I lost my voice. My throat was burning, my head was throbbing, and now the sound of the creature crushing my bones seemed louder. It was so agonizing that I began to wish for death, because maybe, just maybe, I could get rid of that suffering. At that moment I felt awake, as strange and ironic as it sounds. And all I could remember was being torn apart, limb by limb, feeling a great deal of blood over my body that was now beginning to cool. I lay lifeless in that attic, thinking that I was finally dying. My vision was blurring until it went black while my breathing stopped completely. I didn't move a centimeter as I succumbed to death keeping me company. Finally relief. That's when I woke up gasping vigorously for air. I could feel the sweat on me and on my bed as I quickly pulled the blankets off me to sit on the edge of the bed. I was in my own home and it was just a dream, or rather a nightmare. I kept crying with tears streaming down my face as I held my hands. Taking a deep breath, I got up and quickly went to the bathroom, which was so far away from me. But when I turned on the light to look in the mirror, I began to remember my dream in more detail. I saw that my left eye was a dark red hole in the flesh and my face was smeared with dried blood. Impulsively I began to take off my shirt only to find a bone revealed that should have been covered in flesh. There were even deep scratch-like wounds on my back. It was at that moment that I felt so sick that I vomited at the thought. Was it all real? What was going on? Later that morning, I called the police who searched my entire house twice for any sign of an intruder. They found nothing, that's what they told me while I was at the doctor's. The only thing my doctor could tell me about my injuries was that it was probably self-inflicted, but I tried to question him as to how it was possible to completely injure my back like that. A question that's still unanswered, and maybe now you'll understand me. I'm not crazy, I'm just looking for answers to what happened and maybe I'll never get them. I don't even know what's real anymore. What about you? Do you still have your mental insanity intact? Check out other stories here on the channel and I doubt you won't go crazy. See you in the next video.